We began yesterday, Be'ezer Hashem, Simon Chav Ches in the Amudei Hod, and I think we got up to page Kuf Tzadi Dalid, 194, on the left column, Vehine, the Perusham, and he's talking about the Ran and the Rush. And he says, Lo nechleku reish lakish ve'idach man diomerim seder odif al heker o ibcha. As opposed to the Rashbam, who understood that the machlokes here between Reish Lakish and the phantom dissenting opinion revolved around the issue of a head-on collision between the heker and the seder of matzah first and then mar second. And we said that according to the Rashbam, we're going to have a double machlokes between Reish Lakish and the phantom other opinion. First, in terms of what exactly is heker, and secondly, in terms of which is more important, heker or seder. And on the one hand, we have a machlokes, we said about whether heker is the kedima, the fact that he does the dipping before the meal, or is it the trei zimni, the fact that he does tibul twice. And then we have another machlokes here about which trumps which, whether it's the adifus for heker or the adifus for the seder. But now we're going on to another approach, and that's the approach of the Ran and the Tosas Rosh. And there's no machlokas between Reish Lakish and the dissenter about which is primary and which gets priority. Everybody agrees that heker is adif, and that certainly is explicit, even, or at least I should say, according to the Man Yomer who holds mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana, which means that he'll be yotze with the first tibul, even though the matzah has not yet been eaten, but we want to get that first tibul in to achieve heker and arouse the curiosity of the children. And Reish Lakish did not raise any objection to that premise. However, according to the Ran, there is a machlokes between Reish Lakish and the other opinion about heker, and Reish Lakish holds that heker is the kedima, the fact that he does the tibul before the meal, whereas the other opinion would have it that heker is the double dipping. According to Tosa Rosh, everybody agrees that heker is the kedima, the fact that even before the meal he's already doing a tibul. The other Mandi Omar holds that lo plug, we're going to do a tibul sheni, even though he already had accomplished whatever he needed to accomplish with the first tibul b'chazeres. He only had chazeres, and he achieved, according to Mandi Omar, mitzvahs lav tzrichas kavana, both the mitzvah of achilas mar and at the same time hakera, but nevertheless will require tibul sheni as a lo plug, because under regular conditions he will require the tibul sheni b'chazeres because the first tibul was with a yerek, so he needs chazeres for the mitzvah achilas mar. And now we move on to page Kuf Tzadi Hey, and that's Sifkat and Dalet here. Hine Tosas Pirshu, the Af Reish Lakish, Svirle, de HaHeker Latinokos, who Dafka al Yedei Tibul Trei Zimni. Tosas has the other extreme, that everybody, including Reish Lakish, would agree that it's the double dipping that is that kera. And therefore, Tosas says, well, why is it difficult if you hold mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana? Why does Gemara raise the question trei tibuli lamali if we assume that we need the second tibul for hakera? And just like in a case where he ate a yerek for the first tibul and then afterwards marar, the reason why he has a kedima of a tibul of yerek is in order to set up a second tibul, and the heker is the second tibul. So what difference does it make with which achila he fulfills the mitzvah of mar? In any case, in all events, he needs two tibulim in order to set up the mitzvah of hekera, of igadat lebincha. So based on this, Tosfos explains that Reish Lakish understood in our Mishnah that even if he has Shar Yerakos, he's allowed to take Maror for Tibul Rishon. The Mishnah did not qualify and say, well, you know what? We're only going to allow you to take Maror because you have no other Yerakos. That it doesn't say in the Mishnah. Now, if you hold Mitzvah Srichas Kavana, it makes sense that even though he is now eating the maror and he's fulfilling his mitzvah of maror before he ate the matzah, it doesn't matter, because what we could do is we could say the following: if mitzvah tzrichas kavana, then he should have kavana shelo lotzeis b'tibul rishon, and he'll have kavana to be lotzeis in tibul sheni, and he'll achieve both goals. He'll have number one a heker with shnei tibulim, and number two he'll have the seder of matzah first and maror second. But if I hold mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana, therefore the first tibul generates a kiyum of mitzvahs achilas maror, then we don't have the seder of matzah first and maror second, and therefore it makes sense that we should encourage him to look for other yerakos for the first tibul. And when the Gemara says trei tibule lamali, we're going to say the following: why should we do the first tibul with marar and therefore have two tibulim in marar if he can get access to other yerakos? And by setting up two tibulim of marar, he has virtually fulfilled his mitzvah of marar with the first tibul without achieving the kedima of matzah first. So why do it that way? In other words, why should we allow, tibul rishon bechazeres and then forfeit the kedima? Why not insist that the first tibul be b'shar yerakos, force him to go out into the marketplace and find other vegetables, and then he will achieve his achilas marar after the matzah with the second tibul? And the Gemara answers that the Mishnah is talking about a case where he doesn't have Shar Yerakos, where it's impossible for us to, shall we say, push him in that direction to acquire Shar Yerakos. There are just no Yerakos to be had. So why does the Mishnah formulate and frame itself in that scenario where he has no access to any other Yerakos? Why not just simply offer the trei tibulim in a case where he has a yerek for the first tibul, and then the din would be fulfilled lechatchila in the ideal way in which he'll achieve with the second tibul of chazeres the kedima. And the chiddush is that heker adif ala seder, that we would rather have heker, and we want to make sure that the first tibul will generate the heker. And if he has an event that he has only chazeres, he will tip the scale and prefer to be makayim heker, even at the expense of failing and waiving the kiyum of seder of matzah first. And we're not going to say that, look, you know what, you're losing the seder by setting up your first tibul with chazeres, and we're holding now mitzvah ein tzrichas kavana yotze. Maybe we should just drop the first tibul entirely, and then we can achieve in the tibul sheni at least the achilas moral seder after the matzah, even if we are forfeiting the heker, because we don't have two tibulim. And then Reish Lakish asks Lashmeinin Shar Yerokos. It could be that when Reish Lakish says Lashmeinin Shar Yerokos, he holds that Seder Odif ala Heker, and therefore the Mishnah should have told us the ideal way of doing the first tibul, and that's with Shar Yerokos and not with Morar, so that we can achieve the Seder of matzah first and Morar second. Or alternatively, we could explain the Gemara's kasha, Reish Lakish's kasha, based on the Ran and the Rosh, that the Mishnah should have said the dinim of Seder lechatchila and should have formulated the ideal way to fulfill this mitzvah in a way that he doesn't lose a kedima of matzah tomorrow. And that's what we have over here. So let's make a note that we got up to this paragraph here of Kuf Tzadi Hey on the left column. Okay, then now we go back to the Sugyas HaGemara. I don't know if Steve is with us today, I'm not sure, but
sorry, I didn't have the camera on, didn't realize it.
the mamish like talking to I'm talking to John, that's for sure. Baruch Hashem. Okay, let's see on Daf Kuf Yud Daled Amud Beis, the Gemara here that we started of Shnei Tavshilin. We'll just do a quick review, and we said the following: that my Shnei Tavshilin, this is about 20 lines up from the bottom of the page. It's parallel one line below Achlon, the Tosfos Achlon. My Shnei Tavshilin Rav Huna Silka v'Aroza. Rav Amimahader Asilka v'Aroza Hol v'Nofik Mipumi de Rav Huna. Omer Rav Ashi Shmami Nomi Rav Huna. Lest the Chayesh Lahader of Yochim and Nuri. We're allowed to cook rice and eat the cooked rice, the rice porridge, and we're not worried about Rabbi Yochanan Nuri, who holds that Orez is a min dagan v'chayav al chimutz kares v'adam yotzi yidei chavasa b'pesach. Chizkiya Omar afilu dagu beitz shol. If you don't need two separate tavshilin, you could cook two things together, like fish and egg, and that combination is Shnei Tavshilin. Rav Yosef Omar Sorech Shnei Mini Basar. He doesn't allow for any other Tavshilin other than Basar. So Orez and Silka would not be acceptable according to Rav Yosef, and that's because he needs Echad Zecher LePesach v'Echad Zecher LeChagiga. And the premise is that the Basar Chagiga is going to be eaten solely, roasted. And therefore the two mini Basar both have to be roasted. One Zechel Korban Pesach and the other Zechel Chagiga. Ravina Omar Afilu Garma Ubishula, even a piece of meat together with a soup that had been used, or it's a product of cooked meat. Okay. Gemara says the following: Pshita. It goes without saying, Heicha deika shar yerokos. If he has other vegetables for the first tibul, other than chazeres. Mivarech ashar yerokos bori pri adama v'yochel. So on the first tibul with yerek, he recites bori pri adama, like any person who eats a yerek. And the Torah does not allow us to benefit from this world without a bracha. And that's the Yisod of Birchas Hanenim. V'yochid. The Hadar, now he gets to the second tibul, Mevarech al achilas morar v'yochid. This leads the Gemara to the following suffix, Hecha deleka el chasa, chasas chazeres, for the two tibulim, my. Should he recite the bracha of achilas morar on the first tibul? And that might depend upon whether mitzvah srichas kavanu or not. But we'll see how the Gemara develops. First, we want to take a look at footnote number Lamed Vav. And this is a footnote about the bracha of Borei Pri Adam on the first tibul b'shar Yerakos. Sheyiftar bebracha zuas hamara birchas Borei Pri Adama. The marrow, which is eaten later on the second tibul, does not need its own birchas hanenim of Borei Pri Adam because it was potted up by the Borei Pri Adama on the first tibul. And Tosfos says that birchas Borei Pri Adama of the first tibul cannot possibly pater up the marrow. Why? Because of the law of hefsek. So that if there was a great hefsek between the bracha and the achila, then the bracha could not be chal as a bracha on that achila. And there's such a large hefsek between the Borei Pri Adam on the first tibul and the achilas mar on the second tibul, because in between he's going to recite the Haggadah. That might take a little time. Some people just zip through the Haggadah, but if he recites the Haggadah at a decent pace, the Haggadah itself is a hefsek. Now you might ask me, well, every time I eat a Suda, we speak about this and we talk about that, and there's a hefsek, but that's not considered hefsek because it's all within the structure and the framework of a Suda. So the bracha before the Suda is chal on the entire Suda, and there's no din of hefsek. But in this case, we're not talking about a Suda. We're talking about the Borei Pri Adama on the vegetable, then followed by the recitation of the Haggadah until we eat the maror for the second tibul much later on. And the first tibul was not within the framework of a Suda together with the second tibul, and therefore the Borei Pri Adam on the first tibul could not pater up the second tibul. That's the Shita Tosfos. So now we want to try to understand why the Rashbam is not impressed by the concept of hefsek, and therefore, according to the Rashbam, the Borei Pri Adam on the first tibul of Yerek paters up the chazeres after the whole Haggadah. Afal pisha matzinu sha'Haggadah yahefsek linyan netilas yadayim. So let's say before he eats the first tibul, he washes his hands, which is called Davrat Shetibula B'mashke, requires Netilas Yadayim. After the Haggadah, he'll recite another bracha on Netilas Yadayim because Haggadah was a hefsek. So the answer of the Rosh is that that's different. That's Choshen Shema Yisiach Daito V'Noga Mekovos Tatinofos. Tatinofos. He says the following. There's a fundamental difference between a hefsek in Netilas Yadayim and a hefsek in Achila. With regard to Netilas Yadayim, a hefsek means Yadayim Askonios Hem, that we are afraid and we maybe even assume that his hands may have touched, parts of the body, and therefore requires parts of the body that are usually covered, and it requires another Netilas Yadayim. But in the case of Achila, the study of the Haggadah and the Amira of the Haggadah is not considered a hefsek. There's no hesech hadat. Tosfos, on the other hand, holds that although the Bar Pri Adama on the Tibul Rishon could not possibly carry over to the Tibul Sheni, but the Tibul Sheni is after the matzah, and he already made Hamotzi Lechem and Aretz on the matzah, and therefore he doesn't need a bracha on the mar. The mar is part of the Suda. That's a pella. That the mar should be considered part of the Suda? What, is he so hungry and desperate that he has to eat maror? He says, Shebirchas hamotzi poteres es hamoror keven shamor hu min yerek. So what does that mean? Why is Tosfos emphasizing shamor hu yerek? Because Tosfos wants to integrate the maror into the Suda. And he's able to achieve that goal by classifying maror as a yerek. Yerek is part of the Suda. Even though you have to admit it's the strangest kind of achilas yerek that you ever imagined, to eat maror, but nevertheless, it's a yerek. And achilas yerek is part of the Suda. He says that yerek moshech es halev. When a person eats a vegetable, it arouses his appetite. I don't know. Is that a biological fact of life, and does it apply to maror? Imagine you're eating maror as part of the Suda. But if you reject Tosfos and you maintain that the maror is being eaten for the sake of the mitzvah maror, but it's not part of the Suda, and never would a person eat maror as part of the Suda limshoch as halev, then we're going to have to assume that the Bar Pri Adama that he recited on the Tibul Rishon patters up the maror, not the Hamotzi Lechem and Aretz. Maror is not part of the Suda. It's not a Dover Abba Machmas HaSuda. But then you have to assume that the Haggadah is not a hefsek between the Bar Pri Adama before Tibul Rishon and the Achil of maror after the recitation of the Haggadah. Now we have another issue, which is directly related to this first issue. Would you require, after the karpas, after the first tibul, a borei nefashos? If you're going to tell me that according to Rashi, according to Rashbam, the bracha of Bori Pri Adama carries over to the maror and patters up the maror, then you can't recite Bori Nefashos. If you make a bracha achrona on the karpas, then there's no way that the Bori Pri Adama could now relate to the maror. Is that clear? But if we're saying that it's the Hamotzi Lechem in Aretz at the beginning of the Suda on the Matz, that's what patters up the maror, then the karpas in the first tibul is not connected, and that bracha of Bar Pri Adama is not connected to anything else. There's no other achila. He's going to start a Suda with Hamotzi Lechem in Aretz. Is if that be the case, then he should be reciting Borei Nefashos after the Achilas Hayerek B'Tibul Rishon. I'm just going to take out a Haggadah here. I just want to see what it says in the Haggadah. It says here, Lokech me'akarpas pachos mikizayis, matbilo b'mei melech o b'chometz, u'vorech bori priad doma. V'zoyer lechavim b'bracha zu liftar gamis hamorar, it means there won't be any bori nefashos. And then he has a discussion here about whether or not he should be eating a kizayis of karpas. So that's footnote number Lamed Vav, very important footnote. Amar Avhuna. Mevarach meikara amorar bori priadam. So when he says amorar, he's talking about a case where he has no other vegetable, like our Mishnah. He only has chazeres, and he recites bori priadam. What about alachilas mar? It could be that Rav Huna is assuming that mitzvah srichas kavana, and his kavana is not to be yotze to mitzvah mara with the first tibul but bechazeres. Ulabasof, when he gets to the second tibul, mevarach aleha ala chilas mara v'yochid. So my question is, does Rav Huna accept the opinion that mitzvah srichas kavanah? So we want to look at footnotes number Lamed Ches and Lamed Tes. Das Rabbeinu David shalafia mandi over hasover mitzvah seinin srichas kavana, and that means he was yotze with the first moror. If in a case where the tibul rishon he only had moror, then he's got to make the bracha al achilas moror. Wow. So how many brachos will he be reciting on the first tibul? According to the Madiomer, mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavona. 2 brachos. 1, a birchas hanenim on a yerek, and number 2, a birchas hamitzvah on mar, because mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavona. I mean, obviously, once he makes the bracha, he had kavona for the sake of the mitzvah. But okay, but that's not the point. Point is that even if he didn't have kavona, he would have fulfilled his obligation of Mara, and therefore he requires a bracha. I'm not exactly sure which bracha goes first. What would you say about that? My guess is the birchas bori pri adama comes first. Let's just see. In the case of matzah, I think we make the hamotzi first. Am I right? Let's just see. I have this Haggadah has like very few words on top. It's just mostly footnotes. Yes, hamotzi lechem min haaretz comes first. So I'm going to assume, which I'm not sure exactly why, that the birchas hamitzvah is postponed. I'll tell you why. Now I have it. Because of overlasiyasa. We want to attach the birchas hamitzvah to the mitzvah itself. So therefore, we're going to delay and postpone the birchas hamitzvah as much as we can. Now, if you hold mitzvah srichas kavana, says Rabbeinu David, he could have kavana for heker, and not for the mitzvah mora. Okay. So if that be the case, he's not going to make a bracha al achilus mora on the first tibul bechazeres. But the Gemara thinks that maybe he should make a bracha anyway and have kavanah. And it means that he's going to forfeit the kiyum of kedima, of seder, matzah first and mora second. Now comes on Rav Huna, and he says, you know what? Don't make the bracha of al achilus mora on the first tibul. Wait until the second tibul. And now we're looking at footnote number Lamites. Rav Huna sover mitzvah srichas kavana. Because the mitzvah ain't srichas kavana, he was already yotzei with the first tibul. How could he postpone the al achilus mora until the second tibul? But lo yotzi yedei chovas mora b'tibul rishon she'achlo lo kavana, because Rav Huna maintains the position that mitzvah strichas kavana, and he's not machavin in the first tibul for the sake of the mitzvah mora, even though he does the mechanical act of achilus mora.
Do you eat enough though in the first tibul?
You mean to eat a kizayis? Let's just think about your question for a minute. If Rav Huna holds mitzvah srichas kavana, and he's not machavin in the first tibul, therefore I need the second tibul, so we postpone the bracha of al achilas mora until the second tibul. So you're asking, forget about the fact that he doesn't have kavana, he didn't even eat enough because he just wants to create a heker for the tinokos.
Or is that something that's come along later in time where they limited, the amount that they ate in the first tibul?
When you say later in time, you mean there was like a takanas chachamim?
Right. Is that?
Do you know that for a fact, Steve?
I don't. I mean, that's, I'm just wondering if,
I just thought maybe you have
the
access
time
to
of the Mishnah that wasn't the case, and it's something so that we didn't have these problems. I mean, I know in the Haragata it says, okay, less than a kazayas, you're in mind that you're eating, for the Mora, so you're saying Adama now, and, all these things, but, are those a later?
Let me just, for a second, I don't know if I'll find anything here. I'm going to open up the Amudei Hod, and just with a very quick perusal, whether to see. So far, I don't see anything, which is funny. I mean, let me take a quick peek in the back in the what's called the Yalkut Habiurim. We're on Kuf Yudalit Amid Beis. He has a discussion on as to whether the bracha should be lechol marer or alachilas marer. Where's your discussion about kizayis?
Look at Reish Chof Dalet.
Oh, shkoyach, thank you.
The left column.
Excellent. Wow, John, how did you find that so fast? That's pretty impressive. Nechleku Rishonim. Ha'im betibul Rishon tzorich lechol kizayis. Yesh mea Rishonim shesovrim she'ein tzorich lechol kizayis. V'yesh sovrim she'tzorich lechol kizayis. V'amaral mi Prague Hevi Raish she'tzorich lechol kizayis misug yasenim. Yeah, this is your point, Steve. You were machavi to the Maral mi Prague. That's not bad. You're in good company here. And basically what he's saying is that the whole sugya must be assuming that you've got Ida Kizayas. And that's why, we're wondering whether you were Yotze with Tibul Rishon in the case we only had Chazeres because you ate a Kizayas. She'im nomer she'ein tzorch lechol Kizayas b'Tibul Rishon, then the whole Sugi Reish Lakish falls apart. Yeah, mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavanah, but he didn't eat a kazayas, and therefore he wasn't yotzei b'tibul rishon. There it is. Yeah, but the only thing is, we actually seem to be paskening like the other shita that ain't tzarich lechol kazayas. Who does he attribute this to? The Rosh. Sharak b'tibul sheni mevarch malachilus mara. Then we need a kizayis. Al v'tir rishon ein mevarch malachilas, and therefore you don't need a kizayis. So now we have the question of the Maral Mipra. Wait a second, if you don't need a kizayis, then even if I hold that mitzvahs ain't srichas kavani, you can't be yotze. The whole sugya falls apart. So he quotes the Pri Chadash. Hagam she'ein tzorch letibul rishon kizayis ach hoya chachamim hoya lechacham lesaken shiochlenu kizayis kedei sheyetze yidei chovas hamitzvah v'tibul rishon. The Chachamim should have established that we should require a kizayis for Tibul Rishon. So if you hold mitzvah ain't tzrichas kavana, and he only has chazeres, and therefore he's going to fulfill his mitzvah, then there should have been a takana requiring that the tibul rishon should be with the kazayas. But again, that's only if he has no other yerek. If he has a carrot, then he doesn't have to eat a kazayas. Oh, so let's look at Os Beis for a second. He's got 4 answers to this question. Sherish Lakish Sovar Shedochak Lahamed Es HaMishnah Dafka Bachol Pachos Mikizayis. So I guess he's saying that the Mishnah didn't qualify whether he ate a kizayis or less than a kizayis. Therefore, we have to assume that he might have eaten a kizayis. But it doesn't sound right to me because Reish Lakish is going to ask, why do we need a second tibul if the old mitzvah saying tzrichas kavana? Well, maybe he didn't need a kazayas. Now he has number Gimel, a beer, Mordechai. Reish Lakish sober kireish Rav Chizda shetzarich levarach al achilas morar betibul rishon. So what's he adding over here? He's making the bracha on tibul rishon. I'm not following this. This is going to need a lot more. I'm going to make myself a note here to see if we can look at this page tomorrow, maybe. I'm going to write... Okay. So let's go back to Rav Huna for a second. Rav Huna says that he should recite Bori Pri Adom on the first tibul and Al Achilas Mara on the second tibul. And Tosfos is pointing out that mitzvah srichas kavana, and therefore he doesn't have kavana in the first tibul. Let's assume the first tibul was because ice, but he didn't have kavana, and therefore he wasn't yotze, and will postpone the bracha of Al Achilas Mara until the second tibul. Now, the Shagasari has a Gemara in Masechet Pesachim and Beis, and in that Gemara, Rav Huna is committed to the position that mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavanah. So actually, he was Yotzei the mitzvah Mara with the first tibul, but yet he's going to recite the bracha of Alachilas Mara on the second tibul. This reminds you of the Meiri. You remember the Meiri that we discussed? He says, "Mikol makom es birchas achilas Mara hu mevarach betibul sheni." Why is that? He was already Yotzei betibul Rishon. He says, "V'nei shedin kol mitzvos varach aleim over l'asiyosan hu betibul din lechatchila akshelo birach tchila could go b'yonei tiein roy levarach yismos tibul Rishon yochum." Once again, I got stuck. I don't understand what he's saying here. Mitzvah saying tzrichas kavanah. He was Yotzei with the first tibul. Why does he postpone the bracha to the second tibul? Maybe because he didn't eat the matzah yet? Is that what he means? Rabbos, are you able to help me out over here? Bail me out? I don't know. The only thing I can come up with is that he hasn't eaten the matzah yet. I don't know. He should have spelled that out. All right. I see I have a lot of work to do between now and tomorrow. I don't know exactly how I'm going to fit that all in, but whoa. So we have this Maimer Mordechai or Beer Mordechai here on Reish Chaf Daled. And then we have this footnote number Lamed Tes. Now, for tomorrow, Belinetta will pick up Rav Chizda. That's on Kuf Tes Vav. So that's going to be our discussion for tomorrow. Okay, then. So we'll pick up Masechet Sanhedrin in about 20 minutes.